Hey, welcome to the 2023 Mock Selection Committee Selection Show. We have most of our crew here with us to break down the bracket that we have come up with after 4 days, 4 long days of deliberation and conversation, discussion, and breaking down all the numbers. We think we've come to a really good place now. The number one thing to remember is this is of right now. We've got a game going on right now. That game wasn't considered. We had an automatic qualifier just punch their ticket about a half hour ago. We didn't do a lot of deep dive into that team. They could have moved up, and certainly as the week goes on and more teams are added, more upsets happen, they could move up quite a bit as well. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. We'll go back and update, by the way, our bracket for a final one next weekend, and you'll be able to see that on the bracket matrix. I'm going to shoot this out to them tonight so they can have it and host it as well. Thanks for joining us all weekend long on the YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. Make sure you hit subscribe and like and share the word, because we got more things to come for you here as we get into the funnest time of the year. We couldn't have done this without our sponsor, Godfather's Pizza. We are so happy to have them as a sponsor this year. 1,200 locations around the country. Great pizza, pizza pie piled high. Carrie has got a Godfather's Pizza right there. He's got the Hawaiian version that is outstanding. I like the Godfather Classic 8 the other night. They got great desserts and sides. So check them all out. Godfathers.com, pizza pie piled high. So without further ado, I think we'll have some we're gonna show you the top 4 seeds, and then we're gonna break right into the brackets. We'll have discussion within the brackets, look at some of the fun matchups, because I know it's hard for you to believe, but when we do this, we don't even have a chance to really look at the matchups, and this will kind of be our first chance to really dig into them. And then we'll have discussion on just some of the tough decisions that we had to go through during this whole process. So without further ado, let's take a look at the top 4 seeds on the one line, the number 1 seeds for each region. And we should have those up shortly. And Shelby, you can just talk a little bit about, we had a lot of discussion about them.
Yeah, we spent an enormous amount of time on the one line. We went with Alabama as the number 1 overall, Kansas number 2, Houston 3, and Purdue 4. Purdue's game today, there was discussion, would they stay if they lost? Luckily, we didn't have to go far on that. They won, but we weighed everything. The Kansas has a very impressive quad 1 record, but Houston has the metrics all on their side and only 2 losses. The only reason I think we kept Alabama at 1 is because that's where the committee had them a few weeks ago, and they really haven't done enough to fall. We all agreed they have not played well of late, but overall, we felt comfortable putting them at the 1 line for now.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion on very late this afternoon on Alabama, Kansas, Houston. Obviously in the reveal, Houston was 1. What has occurred since then? The overabundance of Kansas wins. I mean, their resume is unreal. And we just felt that was enough to push them past Houston, and very, very close. And I think, Graham, you commented that it was probably the closest 1, 2, 3s we've had in a long time.
Yeah, they really are. They're just so closely put together. You could put them in any order, and I don't think you could complain too much about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's move on to the regions as we can see them, as we saw them through this process. And we're going to move right into the South region first. And as we said, the number 1 overall seed is Alabama. They will be involved in a play-in game against Howard and Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Those 2 teams are currently the number 1 qualifiers in those conferences. And so Alabama will take on the winner of that game. I'm sorry, that would be the Purdue game. Hold on one second here. We got a little bit of a
It's FDU and SEMO.
yeah. I was gonna say that's got to be FDU and SEMO.
Teams who actually are in the field.
Yeah, one second here. Let me.
I'll add quickly while we're messing with something. If you got any questions, throw them in the chat. We'll try and get to them. But also on the one seed conversation, something we didn't even bring up the entire weekend. There's going to be a lot of Purdue or UCLA debate. I think UCLA is just fine being the 2 in the West and not having to go possibly play Connecticut as the 4 seed in Madison Square Garden. But I think that'll be an interesting debate for the next 7 days.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, what are your thoughts on the ones that we had?
Well, I think, very similar to what the committee had during their reveal. And while, there have been a couple of missteps along the way, Purdue recently, and then yesterday, of course, Alabama and Kansas both lost. But I think it's important to remember it's one game out of 30 or 31 or whatever it is for those teams at this point. So you have to put some things in context and weigh the entire season, non-conference, regular season. And all 4 of the teams that are currently on the one line have excelled in those categories, either consistently throughout the year in Houston's case, plus a couple of good road wins for them. And then the other 3 have just been kind of strong from start to finish. I do think, to Carrie's point, UCLA has certainly made a case to be right there on the coattails and seems very much, I would think, along that 4 to 5 line for the committee, which means they're right in position to move up, and if Purdue were to fall early or say on a Friday at the Big Ten tournament, and UCLA is into the championship, I think that there is a possibility that UCLA could overtake them, even though in recent years we haven't seen the committee do a lot necessarily with conference tournaments results.
All right, we've got it back up on the screen again. Let's go through this. So we got in Birmingham on Thursday, Saturday games. We're going to have Alabama taking on Fairleigh Dickinson and the Southeast Missouri State winner. SEMO qualified already for the tournament last night, so it'll be Fairleigh Dickinson and SEMO and Alabama will take on that winner. They will then face the 8-9 game, Maryland and USC. An interesting matchup there as well. In Orlando, in this region, on Thursday and Saturday games, TCU will take on Sam Houston State, a very dangerous team out of the WAC, and then Virginia versus Yale. Virginia, a 4 seed. Kerry, you want to talk a little bit about Virginia dropping to a 4?
Yeah, I don't think we dropped them far enough, but they were number 10, I believe, in the top 16 reveal. We spent a lot of time the last 3 days harking back to the reveal. Pretty much the only team that's really dropped significantly since the reveal was Oklahoma, that Trae Young year. I think it was 2017. They went from number 16 to number 40. There was an extra week of games that they were able to lose 2 more games along the way. But I think Virginia's body of work before facing Boston College, losing that game, which, as we discussed throughout the week, Boston College probably not as bad as its resume. They've been a little bit more competitive. I think they had a good game against Duke as well at home earlier this season. But it is interesting that how much the looking at the pods, Virginia ended up in Orlando, but just having the ACC be this bad as a whole kind of screwed up the whole bracket for us. Nobody wanted Albany. Nobody really wanted Orlando. Greensboro hung out there for a long time. So it's as long as Virginia ends up somewhere in the top, in the 4 or 5 range, they're going to get something on the East Coast, which they would prefer for sure.
Right. Just a huge influx of teams from the Midwest and only a few regions there to put them in. What do you think about that Sam Houston State matchup, Shelby?
Oh, my dad will love that. TCU is playing phenomenal as long as they're healthy. Sam Houston State has got some good wins this year. Probably a quad two now, but Utah, pretty handily, and at Oklahoma, I think it was opening night, a buzzer beater, still counts as a win. So they're not going to be scared of TCU. I don't know. I don't know who I'd pick in that one.
Well, it's going to be a tough 12-5 matchup as they usually are. Let's get to the bottom of the bracket here. We got Kentucky going to have a play-in game against Penn State and Nevada, two of the last teams into our field. We'll talk about those in a minute. Those games will be in Columbus on a Friday, Sunday. Number 3, Marquette champion, regular season champion of the Big East, and the number 1 seed in the Big East tournament will take on Louisiana, the 14th seed, still alive in their tournament. And then down at the bottom of the bracket, we have Iowa taking on Boise State. Iowa with a loss late today that wasn't really factored into our conversation. However, they still hung on in the 7 line, and the Iowa Boise State winner out in Denver will take on Texas. The number 2 seed will take on Vermont in Denver. Texas getting sent out to Denver. Brad, you got some comments on the bottom, on the long, lengthy discussion we had on the bottom with Penn State, Nevada, and Arizona State?
Yeah, it was very, very close for us. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, the field seemed to kind of have been set, and then the last 2 weeks, bubble teams started winning. It's gotten much, much tighter. And for us, in terms of the last few teams in, so Penn State yesterday was out of the field. With their win over Maryland today, they enter the field as our last team in. They improved to 5-6 against quad 1 opponents, 9-11 against quad 1 and quad 2 opponents. Their only bad loss of the season is to Wisconsin, which is not really a bad loss. They're 78 in the net, just 3 spots away from it just being a Q2 loss. Penn State they're very solid. When you compare them, we compared them lastly to Arizona State. Arizona State might have the better overall win, which was at Arizona, but Penn State seems to have the quantity of wins. They have the overall, they have a solid number of wins, including at Illinois, at Northwestern, home wins against Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, and suddenly Michigan is looking like a team who, is creeping up closer. So overall, Penn State is good enough to be in the field right now as our last team in. And then the other team that we were considering on that line was Utah State. Utah State has unbelievable strong metrics. But what it came down to for us is they don't have the strong road win like some of these other teams have, like Arizona State has and like Penn State has. They've beaten some very good Mountain West Conference teams at home, but they are missing the road wins, and they do have 2 Q4 losses, which is something Penn State does not have. Penn State does not have any quad 4 losses. So you do need to penalize for them for that, but at the same time, very, very strong scheduling for them. But unfortunately, Utah State just missed out.
Yeah, so that's our South region. A great breakdown there of the intense debate we had over those last few teams in. And again, this is how it sits now. If we were the committee, I would think next weekend we would look very strongly at what Penn State and Nevada do in their conference tournaments, because it is so razor thin between those 2 teams and Arizona State. We would sit and really have to see how, if any results out of those tournaments impacted what could happen down the road. Anybody else got any comment on the matchups along here?
I don't have anything on the matchups. We did have a question of what made us end up with Kentucky as a 6th seed. We did discuss them a little bit today, even scrubbed them up a little bit along the 6th seed line, but it is pretty wild that they would have been out like 3 weeks ago, and they've just picked up so many quality wins lately. I know they had the tough loss to Vanderbilt. I think that was on Wednesday. But nice win over Arkansas in It wasn't a pretty game, but it was beautiful for their resume. Getting that road win in Bud Walton Arena. I think I feel pretty solidly there on a 6 right now. If they were to win the SEC tournament, maybe they sneak up to a 4 or 5, but I struggle to see them dropping below a 6 at this point.
And to add to that, Kerry, so Kentucky shot up over the course of the last few weeks, like you said. Their 3 high quadrant 1 wins. Obviously, the win at Tennessee is huge, and the area between seeds 7 and 10 really is so tight. That's why it was so easy for Kentucky to kind of jump the line with their 12-7 Q1 and Q2 record. So you have a couple good weeks like Kentucky did. They shot up right past a ton of these Big Ten teams that are, mixed in between that 7 to 10 line, and, came out on top with the way they've played the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. So as we get the East bracket now, the South would play the East in the bracket in the Final Four, the winner of that. So as we move to the East, these games, this region's out in New York, and we're going to start off with Columbus on a Friday. Sunday, we have Purdue sticking very close to home there, going into Buckeye country. They will take on the winner of Howard and Texas A&M Corpus Christi. That winner would take on the winner of Florida Atlantic and Memphis. Much talk about Florida Atlantic. Just an unbelievable season. We had much debate over this team, and we landed them on an 8. They crept up. They were 8 and 9 in between as we went through the seeding during the weekend, and we landed them on an 8. Probably 2 teams very close on that edge of 8 and 9. Florida Atlantic and Memphis. Memphis with a game effort today, but just fell a little short. Also in this bracket, moved down, the number 5 seed Miami. Didn't quite have enough to get to a 4, but Miami's there taking on Drake, who had an impressive performance today. And I think after today, people saw that game. Typical 12 seed who could do some damage in the NCAA tournament. These games are in Albany, and UConn was able to stick close to home, as Kerry pointed out earlier. Not a lot of teams in that Albany area, so UConn in the 4 slot taking on Hofstra. And those games will be played in Albany on a Friday, Sunday. Thoughts, gentlemen?
It's funny, we kept saying Miami's going to go to Orlando. Miami's going to go to Orlando. And now here they are in Albany against UConn, which has just the most geographical advantage for a 4 seed I've ever seen in my life, getting Albany and then Madison Square Garden. They might be facing Florida Atlantic or Memphis to go to the Elite 8. That's going to be one of the best games of the entire tournament.
Yeah.
Fictitiously speaking, who knows if we'll actually get it, but that would be an amazing game.
Absolutely. Speaking of East Coast, we're going to move down to the next coast quadrant of games, and we have Greensboro. And I know this will draw some interest that Duke, luck of the draw, got placed in Greensboro, and they're taking on a Providence team who, for a good chunk of the season, was right up at the top of the Big East standings, but has slumped a little bit lately with kind of a sketchy resume when you dig down into it. And they tumbled down the bracket, tumbled down our seed list as the weekend went along, as other teams moved ahead of them with big wins. But a Duke Providence, that's a must-see 6-11 matchup. They would take on the winner of Tennessee Colgate. Again, speaking of a team that's struggling a little bit right now with the, obviously with the injuries, but Tennessee and Colgate, those games would be played in Greensboro. At the bottom of this East bracket, we have Texas A&M and Pittsburgh, another terrific matchup. These games are played out in Denver, as both Texas teams, Baylor and Texas, the closest pod site to them was Denver. And so they both got sent out there, and Baylor would take on Youngstown State. I know we probably have some talk. We're going to have some questions about Providence, and somebody wants to grab that one.
Yeah, so Providence over the last couple weeks, really, they were hovering in that 7, 8, 9 range for quite a long time. And then just, they played well at home for a long period of time. And then suddenly the last couple games, they were getting blown out against Xavier at home. And then last game, they got obliterated at home against Seton Hall, which really screwed up their metrics. And I know that's just one game, but when you look at their total body of work, they have some good wins. Their good wins are UConn, Marquette, and Creighton, all teams towards the top of the Big East. The only problem is all of those games were at home. And if you're just winning home games and you're not beating anybody of note on the road, it's hard for a team to really move up the board. And as well, they're under 500 against road neutral teams. So yeah, they slipped over the course of the last week or two. And for their sake, they're lucky the season didn't last any longer at this point, or else they could be potentially playing in Dayton or worse.
Or at home where they're good.
Yeah. Any
I'll-
other thoughts on the East before we move to the West?
I'll just add with Providence, I think it'll be very interesting to see. It comes down to how the committee feels about games over Villanova in the past month and a half, which is a much different team. Resume wise, it doesn't look great. Even the road win is quad 2, the home win's quad 3. But if Villanova messes around and wins the Big East tournament, or at least has a good showing, do those wins feel stronger? Because as we were saying, they have 3 really great wins and nothing much beyond that. So I think they're very much on the bubble.
Yep. All right, let's move to the other side of the bracket. The West, first time ever in Las Vegas for a regional. That ought to be fun for the fans heading out there. And the number 1 seed in the West region is Houston. As we said, very close, 1-2-3, Alabama, Kansas, Houston. Houston edging out Purdue, so they're going to move to the West. And they will take on pull it up here. They're going to take on UNC Asheville. Winners today in a tight matchup over Campbell, but they're winners today. In the 8-9 game in the West, we're going to have West Virginia, the 9 seed, taking on Missouri, the 8 seed, in a really, I think, intriguing matchup. West Virginia climbed up the seed list quickly. Graham, if you want to talk a little bit about West Virginia.
Graham
may have
may
lost
have had
Graham.
to run
There he
out
is.
with the kid.
Well, I'll talk. I mean, we had them very close to the cut line on the initial walkthrough of the bracket and so forth. But the win yesterday, I think, really sealed it for them. You look at them now, you just can't ignore the quality of wins they had. I mean, they played an incredibly difficult schedule, one of the toughest in the country. And that gave them just enough to creep into that 9 line, where now you've got a Missouri-West Virginia matchup, really intriguing matchup in my eyes. St. Mary's, champions of the WCC and getting set to kick off their tournament here in a day or two. They're going to take on VCU, another really interesting 5-12. We've got some great 5-12 matchups here. No question about it. And the winner of that game will take on Xavier. Strong season, had a little bit of injury problem down the stretch, but they had just enough to hang on to that 4 seed. They're going to take on Iona, who was pushed up the bracket just slightly with Liberty losing. So the 4-13 matchup in Orlando on a Thursday, Saturday. As we move on down the bracket, Des Moines on a Thursday, Saturday. San Diego State, regular season champions of the Mountain West. They would be involved in a play-in game. The other 2 teams, Wisconsin and North Carolina State. Shelby, give us a little rundown of our discussion on those 2 teams.
Which day? We talked about them extensively as well. We know Wisconsin, their net ranking is not impressive, but they've got wins. They've got road wins. That's significant. The committee really likes that. And with NC State, they're kind of just hanging on. I had them assumed his seed about 2 weeks ago, and they have fallen. And we all agree that they were right where they should be now in a play-in game, and their hold on that spot is not firm.
Yeah, and we discussed a lot, and I know Brad had a really good comment on this. North Carolina State's resume really very similar to North Carolina's, and we don't have them near the field right now.
Yeah, North Carolina State, has just 2 wins over the field, so they're very, very fortunate to be in. They're clean in terms of not having any bad losses, but their 2 wins over the field were against Duke and Miami. 2 teams towards the top of that. Miami at the top, and Duke obviously playing much better. But NC State's a team that just kept slipping down because they may not necessarily have had bad losses, but they weren't picking up any more wins to move the needle and move their seed up of recent, and they just hold on to keep their spot in the field. And then as mentioned, in terms of Wisconsin, that 78 net, would be the worst net to get into the field. But when you have that number of high quality wins, 6 Q1 wins that Wisconsin has, with a top 50 strength of record, including a win at Marquette. That's a very strong win. The way Marquette has played throughout the course of the season, that is a win that really pushed Wisconsin over the top.
And they would take on the winner at Kansas State Furman. Dave, real quickly, I know you got to run, but Kansas State, you were involved in that discussion. Top of the 3 line, bottom of the 2 line, back and forth. We were all weekend. We finally settled on Arizona, edging out Kansas State for that last spot. Your thoughts on Kansas State?
Well, it's after Kansas, you kind of got that trifecta, right? Baylor, Texas, Kansas State next in line. I think Texas, just based not just the fact that they won against Kansas convincingly, but probably has separated it just a little bit above those other 2. Baylor right behind them, a very close call, but I think that Texas might be a slight bit ahead. But either way, that Kansas, Arizona, I think just Arizona's wins at the very top of the quad 1A is a separating factor, and I think the overall strength of schedule comes into play. Kansas State's non-conference effort was not as strong. Arizona played a much stronger non-conference and was very successful against that. So I think that's the edge that allowed them to ultimately end up in the final 2 spot.
And the bottom 4 teams in this region: Michigan State, Auburn. Auburn very close to the cut line for us for a while, but big win yesterday, win they very needed on the resume, beating Tennessee. Michigan State, Auburn 7-10 game, and then out in Sacramento it would be UCLA, Eastern Washington. UCLA, a big conversation between us with UCLA and Purdue, but we just felt Purdue just had a slight edge over UCLA with the quality of wins. So before we move on to the final region, the Midwest, any other comments on this?
Yeah, I just want to say, in terms of UCLA, when it came down to UCLA and Purdue, had Purdue lost to Illinois today, which almost happened, we likely would have shifted UCLA up to the 1 seed line. The only issue with UCLA, and this is still open-ended, Jalen Clark got injured, the best defensive player in the Pac-12. So that is a significant injury. So even if Purdue had lost, it would be a very, very long discussion about whether or not we moved UCLA up. But as mentioned earlier, UCLA gets to be a 2 seed in the West now, so they won't complain at all.
Not at all. All right, let's move to the Midwest, the final of the 4 regions. The Midwest being played in Kansas City, and Jayhawk fans are going to love it that they got the number 2 overall number 1 seed, so they were able to go into the Kansas City region, taking on Elkhorn State, and also being able to go into the pod in Des Moines on a Thursday, Saturday. The winner of that game will take on Illinois, Arkansas. If there's ever an 8-9 game, this is it. 2 teams that are just been in that middle mosh pit, so to speak, all season long, and now they can battle it out in the NCAA tournament. In Albany on Friday and Sunday, we have the 5 seed Iowa State taking on Oral Roberts. I just want to say these 5-12 games that we've put in this bracket would be outstanding games with really strong 12s and 13s this year that really all have a real shot at an upset. On the bottom half, they have Indiana and Toledo, kind of a regional matchup there. So an excellent top quad. Graham, what do you think of these 4 games we have here?
Like you mentioned, I think they'd be phenomenal. Oral Roberts has such a strong record this year, and we just know that they're talented and have that experience. So I think they'd really give Iowa State a run for their money. But mentioning Iowa State, I think for a lot of people, they'd say, have you paid attention? Iowa State has been losing games left and right down the stretch here after the bracket reveal. And yes, we did pay attention. In fact, we had them further down the bracket until a huge win and a very convincing win in Waco against Baylor. But that's not everything. It's the entire body of work. And you look at Iowa State, you see that they won at TCU. Dave talked earlier about those teams at the top of the Big 12. They beat Kansas, they beat Kansas State, they beat Texas, they beat Baylor at home, in addition to beating TCU at home. So the quality wins that Iowa State has have really separated them from teams a little bit further down the bracket. And as you mentioned earlier, Tim, I think that 8-9 game between Illinois and Arkansas would really be probably one of the more fascinating 8-9 games we've ever seen.
Yeah, just back to Iowa State, I know some people, like as you said, probably didn't exactly fall in love with them lately, but especially since the reveal. But you know, we've talked ad nauseum about Kansas and just the unbelievable resume they put up. They have 8 top 25 net wins. Iowa State has 7. So it's they're right there as far as high quality wins, and they've also got these games, as we mentioned yesterday, on the road as well, which is so important. The rest of the bracket, we got a 6-11 matchup, Creighton and Rutgers. Brad and I will probably have to head out to Greensboro to watch that one. And the winner of that game would take on Gonzaga, the 3 seed, taking on UC Irvine. And finally, Northwestern coming in at a 7 seed, taking on Mississippi State in Sacramento. Long trip for the Bulldogs out there. And they would take on the winner of Arizona, as we mentioned earlier, the number 2 seed, taking on Kennesaw State, who was just punched their ticket about an hour ago into the big dance. So some more comments on that before we pull up and kind of take a look at the conference breakdown.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll comment on Rutgers, of course. So Rutgers, interesting team. Way back, you go back 2 months ago, they had gotten a huge win at Purdue, which is easily the reason why they are still in the field. That saved their season for sure. The problem with Rutgers over the course of the last couple of weeks, they had a significant injury to Mawot Mag, and their play has just not been like it was. It's been subpar, and that's being kind. If it wasn't for a 19-point second half comeback against Penn State, there's a good chance Rutgers isn't even in the field at the moment, or at worst, at best they're in Dayton. So they should be very fortunate that the season and our bracket ended right now, because they do have 3 losses on their resume that are quad 3 losses. They did play a very poor non-conference strength of schedule, and they didn't perform particularly well in road neutral games. So they're an 11 seed. It's a tough matchup against Creighton. But the bottom line is they're in the field for a 3rd consecutive year.
And as Brad kind of mentioned there, you got to understand we're doing this as if the season ended today. The Indiana-Michigan game's not even going on. We're doing it as it ended today. This is how the teams stand. There could be things that change, and we'll get to that in a second. These are teams by conference. 10 teams in from the Big 10. 8 from the SEC, 7 from the Big 12, 5 each from the Big East and the ACC, 3 each from the Pac-12 and the Mountain West, and then 2 from the AAC and the WCC. So now what we want to do is we want to show you the bottom of the bracket. We want to show you the last 4 in that we've already discussed, and then also kind of take a look at some of the teams that we just missed our cut line. We've spoken about Arizona State, but these other teams are very much still in play for a bid with 1 week to go. Now, as we talked about a lot, if you missed some of our sessions, you can go back on our YouTube channel and watch them. But we talked about this a lot, that we know the committee doesn't get too deep into the conference tournaments before really those results are taken into consideration, and they've kind of done their final seed list. So some of these teams may have to make their hay early on. As we mentioned, the last 4 in our field were North Carolina State, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Penn State. Penn State being the last team. So Nevada second to last, Wisconsin third to last, and so forth. These teams are the first 4 out. And again, we've already talked about Arizona State a little bit. But the first 4, we actually have a section of basically the last 8 teams out. So Arizona was the first team out. We also mentioned that we had a lot of discussion about Utah State. They would be the second team out. Then there's the following teams that we discussed but didn't make the cut. And in this order, Oklahoma State, Michigan, Vanderbilt, Charleston, North Carolina, and Clemson. Certainly not out of the realm of possibility of those 6 to have a shot along with Utah State and Arizona State to get into the field of 68. Let's have some comment. Kerry, maybe you have a little bit of comment on these first, the 8 out here that we have.
Yeah, sorry, I keep checking the Michigan-Indiana game that's not officially happening for our bracket. But yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt in particular, to speak to what you were saying about kind of the timing of how the committee does it, I believe they're supposed to play the night game on Friday, the SEC quarterfinal. If they win their first game, I think it's against either Georgia or LSU, but they would play Kentucky Friday night, which is, to us, for a team that's just barely outside of the field, that would feel like a massive victory. But is it too late in the process? We really don't know when the committee decides to stop paying attention. It certainly seems like they didn't watch any of Texas A&M's run last year or Notre Dame's early exit from the ACC tournament last year. So, we try not to adjust too dramatically for conference tournament results unless, a Virginia Tech goes on a run and secures the auto bid. But I think aside from that potential huge win, the team in here that stands out is certainly Utah State because of they're 21 in the net. Their computer metrics have been phenomenal all season long because they've gone 20-1 against quads 2 and 3, 17 of those wins by at least 9 points. Like they've just, juiced the numbers, if you will, for a team that had 2 terrible quad 4 losses to Weber State and SMU and didn't have a single quad 1 win until beating Boise State last night. But that may have pushed them over the edge. Didn't quite get them there for us, but I think the committee is going to have to really look in the mirror and ask themselves why we even have the net if our number 21 team isn't in the field.
Yeah, interesting that with and you made the point, Kerry. I mean, we haven't had really a normal net season yet, so
Sure.
The net's relatively new. But it would be interesting with our bracket. We would have a team that had never a team that was that ranked that highly in the net left out of the field, and also added a team that was way up in the 70s, like Wisconsin. So it'd be kind of interesting, the 2 polar opposites on both sides of our bracket. We had a lot of discussion. Anybody else have any comments on like the discussion we had or the interesting teams we discussed or anything like that?
Just that the NCAA has stated several times the net is not a ranking tool, it is a sorting tool.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they'll go back to, whether you believe it or not. I'm not sure I do, but that's what they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably put too much emphasis in the statistics of this team has never been left out or they've never picked a team this high and so forth, but those do fall into play.
And we got overtime.
Yep. 69-69, a little nice.
It's been a wild weekend of games, no doubt about it. Well, I just can't thank all of my wonderful partners in this. We've just had a great time and we enjoy doing this so much, and we hope you enjoyed all of the process. We hope we were able to educate a lot of you on the way, and we tried to do that through all the sessions and give you examples, and we loved all your questions. We tried to answer all those. We're not done. If you want more of what we do, we're going to get together. Follow us on Twitter, first of all, at 2023 MockBB. And then also Next Sunday morning, we will noonish time, 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern. We will get together to kind of go over, revamp our bracket, so to speak, in a short 1 hour segment where we can update this with the results from this week now, add all the automatic qualifiers, and come up with another clean bracket that we will send off to the bracket matrix. And you can see how we did, and we did quite well last year, and I'm sure we will do equally as well this year. So if
one
nobody's got
quick
anything
question.
else, go ahead,
Yeah.
Shelby.
How long did we spend on setting up matchups?
The whole time.
There was no time because I had to make sure Rocco knew where these teams were supposed to go in the in the matchups, in the cities and odds. So No, yeah, I know.
Debunking a conspiracy theory.
it just baffles me that people think it is, because every time I get done with my bracket, I'll look and go, oh my God, I've got,
Yep.
Duke and Greensboro. I didn't even realize that, so forth. All right, guys, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much to Godfather's Pizza. Check them out, alwaysgodfathers.com. Thanks, and we will be in touch with you again throughout the week on Twitter and next week with another edition of Mock Selection Committee. Thank you, guys.